Hello, it's me again. Part 6 of Aaron's History, The Light and the Truth of Slavery, Aaron's History. This work is the property of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. It may be used freely by individuals for research, teaching, and personal use as long as this statement of availability is included in the text. The Worn-Out Slave. A preacher traveling the southern states was rowed across a ferry by a pious old Negro who had labored hard through early manhood and middle age to purchase freedom for himself and his wife, and he mourned that old age and loss of strength would compel him to leave all his children in slavery. He laid his hand on his breast and said, "Master has all my strength, and I have these old bones." His head was white, and his eyes were dim, and his face was marked by woe. The vigor of youth had passed from him, and labor had bent him low. He gave the oars his remnant of strength as the shallop left the shore, and he told his tale of great grief at length, ere the stream was buried o'er. He looked on one, with his eyes dim ray, that he ne'er shall see again, until the break of endless day, far beyond a tyrant's reign. "Master," he said, "you're a child of God. His seal is upon your face. Poor Negro has felt his chastening rod, and gloried too in his grace. The sun that rose upon the Master's mom rejoiced o'er a free-born babe, but the light that broke when I was born looked down on a fettered slave. I grew apace to my bitter lot, too soon felt my heavy chin, and often I cried, oh, why will not earth take back her child again? I thought perhaps if I bent to toil, that heaven might let me see a day in which I could tread the soil and breathe the air of the free. I toiled at mom, and I toiled at morn, and I toiled at eve, and I toiled in the midday sun. I rested not when they gave me leave, and said that my work was done. I yielded not to summer's heat, nor turned from the winter's frost, nor sheltered myself from storms that beat, lest a copper should be lost. I paid for myself, I have paid for my life, but our sands are nearly run, and the freedom I bought at the end of my life would have come with my setting sun." He smote his breast with his eyes on high, in a voice of subdued tones, said, "Master has all my strength, and I have nothing but these old bones. Time adds a weight to each month that rolls. We soon shall rest in our graves. We trust in Christ to receive our souls, but we leave our children slaves." When told that woman should not meddle with slavery, point to the widow of Lovejoy, left alone to rear her fatherless child, and say that in a country where slavery strews with desolation a woman's hearthstone, it becomes a woman to seek for the cause, and if possible to apply a remedy. You have the authority of slaveholders for concerning yourselves even with politics. At a political meeting in Mississippi, the following toast was drank. The ladies, in the dark hour of our revolutionary struggle, they nobly stood by us. They will again do so in a struggle for correct principles. See Manchester, Miss M.I. Whig, October 21, 1837. When you are keenly afflicted by meeting coldness, apathy, and indifference, then offer to lend the narrative of Charles Ball or James Williams or some other publication where the slave speaks for himself. Tell the story of Mary Brown of Ohio, who was stolen from her free parents in Washington City. The committee who prepared the Ohio report, of which A. Waddles was chairman, say they are assured by those who knew Mary at the South that her statements may be implicitly relied on. Her manner in telling her story was artless and simple, bespeaking conscious truth. She lived with her parents until the death of her mother. One day, when near the Potomac Bridge, Mr. Humphrey, the sheriff, overtook her and told her she must go with him. She inquired what for. He made no reply, but told her to come along. He took her immediately to a slave auction. Mary said she was free, but Mr. Humphrey contradicted her, and the sale went on. The auctioneer soon struck her off for 350 to a Mississippi trader, and she was taken directly to the jail. After a few hours, she was handcuffed, chained to a manslave, and started in a drove for about 40 for New Orleans. The handcuffs so swelled her wrists that they were obliged to take them off at night and put fetters on her ankles. In the morning, the handcuffs were again put on. Thus they traveled for 2 weeks, wading rivers, being whipped up all day and beaten all night. And if they did not get their distance, Mary says she frequently waded rivers in her chains, with water up to her waist. It was in October, and the weather was cold and frosty. After traveling thus 12 or 15 days, her arms and ankles became so swollen that she felt she could go no further. Blisters would form on her feet as large as dollars, which at night she would have to open, while all day the shackles would cut into her lacerated wrist. They had no beds, and usually slept in barns or out in the naked ground. Was in such misery when she lay down that she could only lie and cry all night. Still they drove them on for another week. Her spirits became so depressed, and she grieved so much about leaving her friends that she could not eat, and every time the trader caught her crying, he would beat her, accompanying it with dreadful curses. She was at length seized with burning fever, and the trader, fearing he should lose her, carried her the remainder of the way in a wagon. When they arrived at Natchez, they were all offered for sale, and as Mary was still sick, she begged that she might be sold to a kind master. She sometimes made this request in presence of purchasers, but was always insulted for it. And after they were gone, the trader punished her for such presumption in revealing her sickness, and thus preventing her sale. On one occasion, he tied her up by her hands so that she could only touch the end of her toes to the floor. This was soon after breakfast. He kept her thus suspended, whipping her at intervals through the day. At evening, he took her down. She was so much bruised that she could not lie down for more than a week afterwards. The rest of her the rest of her history while a slave is full of horror. Her case differs a little from thousands, except that she escaped to reveal her woes, while they suffer and die unheard. The dispatches of the Secretary of War assert that there were in the fort 300 Negroes, men, women, and children, and 20 Indians. The fascinations of an almost impenetrable swamp. In 1837, the New Orleans Picayune, reporting the capture of a leader of fugitives called Squire, the Brigand of the Swamp, while they can support a gang and have a camp, and we may expect our Negroes to run away. In the same article, he says the place whose delight had kept Squire so long from the happiness of slavery, and to which the happy slaves would of course escape, was a marsh almost impenetrable to our citizens. During our 2 wars with Great Britain, a multitude of slaves fled from their masters and joined the British forces. To furnish the reader some data for judging of the number that escaped during the Revolutionary War, we insert the following extract from Ramsay's history. When the British evacuated Charleston, South Carolina in 1782, Governor Matthews demanded the restoration of some 1,000 of Negroes who were within their lines. These, however, were but a small part of the whole taken away at the evacuation. But that number is very inconsiderable when compared with the thousands that were lost from the first to the last of the war. It has been computed by good judges that between the years 1775 and 1783, the state of South Carolina, lost 25,000 Negroes. See page 30, Ramsey's History, South Carolina, Volume 1, page 473. At least a fifth part of all the slaves in the state at the beginning of the war. During Dr. Ramsey, being a native and resident of Charleston, South Carolina, enjoyed every faculty for asserting the facts in the case, but his testimony does not stand alone. Colonel Lee of Virginia, in his Memoirs of the War in the South Department, Volume 2, page 456, says of the Negroes seduced and taken from the inhabitants of South Carolina. It is asserted upon the authority of the best informed citizens of South Carolina that 20,000 slaves were lost to the state in the consequence of the war. Lord Dunmore, governor of Virginia, after escaping from Williamsburg in 1775 in a vessel in James River, offered liberty to those slaves who would join him. It appears from the history that 100 of them soon after enumerated among his forces. How many joined him does not appear. Burke's Virginia, Volume 3, page 431. Extract of a letter from Mr. Jefferson, then Secretary of State, to Mr. Hammond, Minister of Great Britain, dated Philadelphia, December 15th, 1791. On withdrawing the troops from New York, a large embarkation of Negroes, the property of the inhabitants of the U.S., took place. A very great number was carried off in private vessels, without admitting the inspection of the American commissioners. See Political Correspondence, Papers Relative to Great Britain, page 4. The following may enable the reader to form some judgment of the number that escaped during the last war. Extract from the report of the Committee of Ways and Means to the House of Representatives, January 5th, 1819. At the conclusion of the war in 1815, it being known that many thousands of slaves of our citizens had been received off by the British ships of war, etc. I'm not sure what these abbreviations are for, so AM period, ST period, PAP period, J period, REL period, volume 4, page 114, extract from a letter from Honorable John Quincy Adams to Lord Castlereagh, February 19th, 1816. In his letter of the 5th of September, the undersigned had the honor of enclosing a list of 702 slaves carried away after the ratification of the Treaty of Peace from Cumberland Island and the waters adjacent. In number, perhaps still greater, was Caraway from Tangier Island in the state of Virginia and from other states. It might be Ambassador, State, PAP, I'm not sure. AM period, ST period, PAP period, ID period, session abbreviated, 16th, Congress abbreviated number 18, page 18. There were at Natchez on the plantations a considerable number of Negroes, nearly all of whom had joined the murderers of their masters in order to gain their freedom and had followed their new friends among the Chickasaws. This circumstance and their consequent emancipation were known to their former companions and suggested the possibility of their own release from bondage. They became restless and indocile. Martin's History of Low, Volume 1, page 292, date 1832. This property was therefore but of little value near the Ohio River because runaways receive aid and protection from the people in the new territories and states. This was the speech of Doddridge in BCON, October 28th, 1829 through December 17th, 1831. Mr. Wright of Maryland laid before the House an attested copy of the resolution passed February 16th, 1831 by the General Assembly of the state, complaining of the protection afforded by the citizens of Pennsylvania to the slaves who absconded but and go into the state, and calling for an act of Congress to prevent the continuance of the evils complained of. They say that the present state of things, protection given to the happy fugitives, is not only vexatious to the master, but extremely pernicious and calculated to destroy the content and happiness of slaves. Contented slaves, bad property. Their vicinity to non-slaveholding states must forever render this sort of property precarious and insecure. Speech of Judge Upshire in the Virginia Convention, October 28, 1829, CDEB, BA, Convention, page 76, from the vicinity of the country through which the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal passes to Pennsylvania, slaves cannot be held there. Speech of Mr. Scott in the Virginia Convention, 1829, debate, page 126. Contentment of Judge Washington's slaves. Honorable Bushrod Washington, nephew of General Washington and judge of the Supreme Court of the U.S., sold for 54 of his slaves to be taken to Louisiana in August 1831 while he was president of the American Colonization Society. In a letter published in the Baltimore Telegraph, September 18th, 1831, he says, "I called the slaves together and assured them I had no intention to give freedom to any of them, that the disappointment caused by the declaration should lead to the consequences which followed was to be expected. I had good reason for anticipating the escape of all the laboring men of any value to the northern states as soon as I could leave home. Slaves know when to seem contented." Testimony of James Bradley, an emancipated slave. He bought his freedom in 1832 when nearly 30 years old. In an account of his life in the Oasis, speaking on this point, he says, "I do not believe there ever was a slave who did not long for liberty. I was never acquainted with the slaveholder well he was treated, who did not long to be, I was never acquainted with the slave, however well he was treated, who did not long to be free. There is one thing about this that people in the free states do not understand. When they ask slaves whether they wish for liberty, they answer no, and very likely they would say they would not leave their master for the world, but at the same time they desire for liberty more than anything else. The truth is, if a slave shows any discontent, he is sure to be treated worse, and work the harder for it, and every slave knows this. When they are alone, all their talk is about liberty. Liberty, it is the great thought and feeling that fills the mind for all the time. So says Aaron, or so Aaron says. Isaiah chapter 59. A short chapter that the wayfaring Aaron took out of God's holy word. 1. Behold, the Lord's hand is not shortened that it cannot save, neither is the ear heavy that it cannot hear. 2. But your iniquities have separated between you and your God, and your sins have hid his face from you, that he will not hear. 3. For your hands are defiled with blood, and your fingers with iniquity. Your lips have spoken lies, your tongue hath muttered perversiveness. 4. None calleth for justice, nor any pleadeth for truth. They trust in vanity, and speak lies. They conceive mischief, and bring forth iniquity. 5. They hatch cockatrice eggs, and weave the spider's web. He that eateth of their eggs dieth, and that which is crushed breaketh out into a viper. 6. Their webs shall not become garments, neither shall they cover themselves with their works. Their works are works of iniquity, and the act of violence is found in their hands. 7. Their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed innocent blood. Their thoughts are thoughts of iniquity. Wasting and destruction are in their paths. 8. The way of peace they know not, and there is no judgment in their goings. They have made them crooked paths. Whosoever goeth therein shall not know peace. 9. Therefore is judgment far from us, neither doth justice overtake us. We wait for light, but behold obscurity, for brightness, but we walk in darkness. 10. We grope for the wall like the blind, and we grope as if we had no eyes. We stumble at noon, day as in the night. We are in desolate places as dead men. 11. We roar like bears and mourn sore like doves. We look for judgment, but there is none. For salvation, but it is far off from us. 12. For our transgressions are multiplied before thee, and our sins testify against us. And as for our iniquities, we know them. 13. In transgressing and lying against the Lord, and departing away from our God, speaking oppression and revolt, conceiving and uttering from the heart words of falsehood. 14. And judgment is turned away backward, and justice standeth afar off. For truth is fallen in the street, and equity cannot enter. 15. Yea, truth faileth, and he that departeth from evil maketh himself a prey. And the Lord saw it, and it displeased him that there was no judgment. 16. And he saw that there was no man, and wondered that there was no intercessor. Therefore his arm brought salvation unto him, and his righteousness it sustained him. 17. For he put on righteousness as a breastplate, and an helmet of salvation upon his head. And he put on the garments of vengeance for clothing, and was clad with zeal as a cloak. 18. According to their deeds, accordingly he will repay. Fury to his adversaries, recompense to his enemies. To the islands he will pay recompense. 19. So shall they fear the name of the Lord from the west, and his glory from the rising of the sun. When the enemy shall come in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord shall lift up a standard against him. 20. And the Redeemer shall come to Zion, and unto them that turn from transgression in Jacob, saith the Lord. 21. As for me, this is my covenant with them, saith the Lord. My spirit that is upon thee, and my words which I have put in thy mouth, shall not depart out of thy mouth, nor out of the mouth of thy seed, nor out of the mouth of thy seed's seed, saith the Lord, from henceforth and forever. I asked a man of sorrows and of tears, whose looks told anguish pressed him more than years. He mused a while, and then distinctly said, Life is a burden, would that I were dead. I asked a Christian who had early strayed from virtue's paths. This was the answer made. Life is a precious boon to mortals given, which, if well spent, will be renewed in heaven. Here is a short sentence of the wayfaring Aaron. A section from the life of Moses Grandy, late a slave. When I reached Deep Creek, I went to the house of Captain Edward Miner. He was very glad to see me, for in former days I had done much business for him. He said how sorry he had been to hear that I was at field work. He inquired where I was going. I said to Norfolk, to get some of the merchants to let me have money to buy myself. He replied, What did I always say to you? Was it not that I would let you have the money at any time if you would only tell me when you could be sold? He called Miss Miner into the room and told her I could be sold for my freedom, and she was rejoiced to hear it. He said, "Put up your horse at Mr. Western's tavern, for you need go no further. I have plenty of old rusty dollars, and no man shall put his hand on your collar again to say you are a slave. Come and stay with me tonight, and in the morning I will get Mr. Garrett's horse and go with you." The next morning we set off and found Master at Major Ference's at the Channel, where I knew he was to be that day, to sell his share of the canal. When I saw him, he told me to go forward home, for he would not sell me. I felt sick and sadly disappointed. Captain Miner stepped up to him and showed him the paper he had given me, saying, "Mr. Sawyer, is not this your handwriting?" He replied, "Mistress said the last word when I came away. I was not to sell him, but send him home again." Captain Miner said, "Mind, gentlemen, I do not want him for a slave. I want to buy him for freedom. He will repay me the money, and I shall not charge him a cent of interest for it. I would not have a colored person to drag me down to hell for all the money in the world." A gentleman who was by said it was a shame I should be so treated. "I have bought myself so often that Mr. Sawyer ought to let me go. The very worst man is an overseer over the persons employed in digging the canal. Mr. Wiley M. Macpherson was there. He was never known to speak in favor of a colored person. Even he said that Mr. Sawyer ought to let me go, as I had been sold so often. At length Mr. Sawyer consented I should go for $650, and would take no less. I wished Captain Miner to give the extra 50, and not stand about it. I believe it was that what I believe it was what Macpherson said that induced my master to let me go, for he was well known for his great severity to colored people, so that after even he had said so, master could not stand out. The Lord must have opened Macpherson's heart to say it. I have said that Macpherson was an overseer where slaves were employed in cutting canals. The labor there was very severe. The ground is often very boggy. The Negroes are up in the middle or much deeper in mud and water, cutting away roots and bailing out mud. If they can keep their heads above water, they work on. They lodge in huts, or as they are called, camps made of shingles or boards. They lie down in the mud, which has adhered to them, making a great fire to dry themselves, to keep off the cold. No bedding whatever is allowed them. It is only by work done over his master that any of them can get a blanket. They are paid nothing except for this overwork. Their masters come once a month to receive the money for their labor. Then perhaps some few very good masters will give them $2 each. Some others $1. Some a pound of tobacco, and some nothing at all. The food is more abundant than that of field slaves, indeed. It is the best allowance in America. It consists of a peck of meal and 6 pounds of pork per week. The pork is commonly not good. It is damaged and is bought as cheap as possible at auction. Macpherson gave the same task to each slave. Of course, the weak ones often failed to do it. I have often seen him tie up persons and flog them in the morning only because they were unable to get the previous day's task done. After they were flogged, pork or beef brine was put on their bleeding backs to increase the pain. He sitting by, resting himself and seeing it done. After being thus flogged and pickled, the sufferers often remained tied up all day, the feet just touching the ground, the legs tied, and pieces of wood put between the legs. All the motion allowed was slight turn of neck, thus exposed the helpless. The yellow flies and mosquitoes in great numbers would settle on the bleeding and smarting back and put the sufferer to extreme torture. This continued all day. for they were not taken down till night. Here is a short sentence of Aaron's in conclusion. Good news and glad tidings and great joy. He that is free in Christ is free indeed. Then this is heaven. I have often heard of heaven. Behold, here it is. Broad is the road that leads to death, and thousands walk together there. But wisdom shows a narrow path, and here and there a traveler.